Hey people, Trish Wood here. What an amazing week it's been. We've had the giant convoy running from all across Canada, different corners of the country into Ottawa, protesting vaccine mandates and many other things about COVID policy, and how the policy has been brought to bear on the citizens of Canada. The great bit of footage from that, of course, is the overpasses and the people from all walks of life lining the highways to wave them on and cheer for them and bring them food. There were nuns in their little kind of Sister Bertrill habits on the side of the road with signs, and Hutterites and all kinds of First Nations people. A real cross-section of Canadian life out there cheering them on. And man, it was so uplifting for me. And if you saw our live crowdcast with a couple of the organizers, a truck driver named Chris Barber and Tamara Leach, who is one of the fundraisers and organizers of the protest, and Jake Peters was on as well, you'll recall that I was very, very moved and uplifted by the idea that people were finally coming together to say, you know, we want you to look at this a different way, and you can't just arbitrarily hit us with rulings and policy without backing up what you're doing with data and proof that it's actually solving problems. That's my issue. The truckers are saying that less, but that's my issue. So it was wonderful because I know so many people, many of whom listen to my podcast, Trish Wood Is Critical, on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher, and contact me to say how alone they feel, that many of the people they know, they do not feel comfortable raising concerns about the policies with. People just don't seem to want to hear it. So this was a kind of a great moment. This country's great working people, the truck drivers, we were encouraged by the Prime Minister himself to heroify when they were working during the pandemic. He had nothing but nice things to say about them. But of course, that's changed. So that was really great. But it did fall off. My feelings of happiness about it fell off in the last 48 hours for two reasons. And they were predictable. And we did indeed talk about them on that live show. One of them is the idea that we absolutely knew that the truckers and the people with the truckers would be demonized with the same playbook that the left members of the whole Democratic Party in the United States has been using now since about 2015. They demonized their political opponents by smearing them with labels such as misogynistic. Prime Minister Trudeau even tried that trick. Doesn't even know the people, but that's what he calls them, or, you know, white supremacist or racist or whatever, you know, vile. They don't really know a thing about these people collectively. So those smears, we knew those smears were coming, but I will tell you something, to see them in full flower in the mainstream media in Canada, and not so much in the UK or other places, by the way, it was really Canada that was smearing them, Canadian media. And also on social media was very, very, very disheartening. You know, I'm going to say this because it's a truth that needs to be told. Black Lives Matter, for whom the Prime Minister of this country took a knee, was encouraging the burning down of buildings. People were killed during those protests. I'm not saying Black Lives Matter didn't have a point. I've sided with left-wing causes most of my adult life. I have real problems with Black Lives Matter now, but they were involved in a lot of pretty scary stuff. You know, there was a guillotine that was brought to Queen's Park in the States. There was encouraging attacks on police officers, all kinds of terrible things, not to mention looting, rioting, and burning down of buildings and taking over entire neighborhoods. Those things were happening, right? And what does our Prime Minister do there? He takes a knee with those people, and then today, in this kind of weaselly comment he made, he said he supported them, and that's the kind of protest that he likes. Well, he liked that kind of protest because they weren't targeting him, right? So this is the Orwellian world we live in, that the Prime Minister only likes protests that don't target him. Well, protests are meant to target leaders. That's what they're for. That's what they're about. These are the ones I used to go to. So, you know, here he is, and And it really is a divide in this country that I never thought I would see. I didn't think we would go the way of America, which is now kind of a failed state based on the division around these issues. I never thought we would go that way, but the mainstream media or legacy media are going that way, and they are carrying water for the Liberal Party and for woke ideology in a way that's really, really dangerous, because as I've said on the show many times, if you don't have a neutral, objective, or at least attempting to be objective media, you do not have democracy. And that is why America is failing right now. Just to remind you, just so in this context you fully understand, the media are the ones responsible for installing Joe Biden. They absolutely censored bad information about him. Hunter Biden's laptop, which had proof in it that that the Biden family is compromised both by the Ukraine, who he is about to send troops to engage in a war with Russia. I mean, imagine that. And also with China. There was a lot of information in there about Joe Biden and meetings with China. So the media censored that because the media wanted Joe Biden to win. You know, Mark Zuckerberg spent, I believe, $415 million getting Joe Biden elected. And he's like maybe the worst president ever. This is why the media should never, ever behave that way. Because what you have in America now, really, it is an authoritarian government supported by the media who have chosen their party, chosen the issues that they think are the only ones worth exploring. And that's where the country is going. And you see it. It's not working out that well for them, is it? To see that happening here, and it is happening here, it's very, very clear. All weekend long, there were a couple of peripheral incidences there. Generally speaking, the majority of the people at the protests on the weekend were peaceful and respectful. And I mean, they spent Sundays singing Amazing Grace and having church services with Indian drumming. But there were some weird things which always happen at protests, I used to go to protests. Sometimes I'd be so offended by what was going on that I'd leave. You know, protests attract weirdos, right? You don't smear the whole group or the whole idea unless it's people who are not liked by the media and the left-wing government in power. Then you smear away and you focus on the small incidences that happened, right? So I'm just going to give you a little sampling of what was said. And they're all using the same language in the same instances. Isn't that interesting? One guy says, in Ottawa today, we've seen Nazi and Confederate flags, racist and violent signs, Terry Fox and the Canadian War Memorial being desecrated, threats to break into Parliament, workers being harassed and threatened. I mean, okay, so one guy had a Confederate flag, and who even knows who he was? Like, but they were tracking him, right? Terry Fox was not desecrated. They put a baseball cap on him. They put a sign on him about vaccine mandates, and I think he was holding a Canadian flag, maybe upside down, right? Okay, there was also many pictures of Terry Fox holding a pride flag, and the country didn't freak out about that. That wasn't desecration, right? But if it's something that the left in the media don't agree with, it is desecration. That's what I'm talking about, right? It's one thing for one group, and a weapon if it's done by the other group. Let me just find you another one. Here we go. They use the same points. If you're upset at the protesters who parked vehicles at the cenotaph at the National War Memorial, vandalized Terry Fox's statue, and defaced the Canadian flag with swastikas, you should be absolutely outraged at the politicians who endorsed the process. Now that's a doctor. That's a very vocal pro-lockdown, pro-vaccine doctor who may or may not have pronouns in his bio. I haven't looked, but that they tend to. So that's what happened over the weekend. This wonderful moment was destroyed, in a sense, by the mainstream media who planned it. This is playbook stuff. It's what they do in the States. They're starting to do it here now. And, you know, we mustn't stand for it. Of course, each one of those incidences is not great. But every protest has incidences like that, and the protesters are not smeared. So that's my feeling about that. But I do feel quite down about it because people were feeling that the truckers were speaking for many, many, many Canadians. One thing I will say, there was a poll that came out today that showed that I think 57% of Canadians want the mandates and all of the restrictions to stop. So that's good. That must mean the truckers had some influence, and that's certainly more than a fringe minority, as the Prime Minister said, who, by the way, is double vax boosted and has COVID. And while he's announcing that, is saying, but make sure you get your vaccine. So this is maybe some people are questioning, right? The illogic of it all. So that was one thing that kind of brought me down a bit on this Monday. But the other thing was the Joe Rogan event. I talk about Joe Rogan a fair bit. I admire what he's achieved, and I was really happy to see that he started to have on some important COVID skeptic guests on the show, and those shows took off. Peter McCullough, Robert Malone, the ivermectin docs. Big study out of Japan today too. Ivermectin got really good results, so that's good to know. That was good news. But as you know, Spotify was attacked by some Hollywood people, including Neil Young, who is now a Hollywood person, who pulled his music from Spotify in protest over Joe Rogan's show, because Joe Rogan was showing the other side of the story on COVID, right? That's not allowed. That is not allowed. Then Joni Mitchell, who was my hero growing up, absolutely my hero, wanted to be her, always wanted to learn those open tunings on her Martin guitar. I had a Gibson, I couldn't afford a Martin, but I always wanted to learn to play like her, and I could sing a bit like her too. I knew the lyrics to every song she ever wrote. Then she stepped up, and I thought, wow, these people who were so bold and so brave and so counterculture in the 60s and the 70s are now literally siding with the person they would call the man. They're siding with big pharma, with government, and with a mainstream media who absolutely has an agenda and has allied themselves with the global elites, right? These were my heroes. But I guess they're old, right? And they get scared maybe when they're old because they're not doing well and they're afraid of COVID or something, or maybe they've just got really bad comms teams, But, not thinking clearly, and certainly not the heroic people they were back in the day. So that's kind of a drag. But so what happened to Joe Rogan and Spotify, who really held the line for a while, I must say they've been very courageous, and they deserve a lot of support from us. But what happened just today was that Joe Rogan made an announcement that they're going to put some kind of a little warning on his shows, and he's going to try to be more balanced in his COVID coverage. Here's my thing about that. That really upset me, because Joe Rogan is the balance, right? It's not like Peter McCullough and Robert Malone and all those guys are going on MSNBC every night. They're not. Those people can't find a place to be heard except for in alternative podcasts. They can't. So that is the balance, right? That is the balance. For Joe Rogan to now have on all the same people who are on all the time on mainstream media to balance those guys is absolutely absurd. It is absurd. As you know, I covered Tony Fauci and AIDS back in the day, and I was doing a lot of the same kind of stuff I'm doing now and that Joe Rogan is doing now, and I won awards for it. I did. I won awards for criticizing Tony Fauci. It was a totally different time then, but I did, right? Now, Joe Rogan has to balance esteemed credentialed doctors who have another idea about COVID, which is what science is all about. Remember Galileo, who said the world was round? They didn't like that very much. He was the lone wolf, but he was right. Today they would censor and deplatform him and punish Joe Rogan for having him on. So I don't like that happened. I understand why Spotify did it. They lost apparently $4 billion or something over this kerfuffle. Probably the market makers, on Wall Street were screwing about with the stock, because those people are all alive right now. Like, never forget that. Media, Wall Street, the Democratic Party in Canada, the Liberal Party, they are all aligned. They are what I call global elites. That's what they are. The media has stopped being the bulwark between the people and the government. They've stopped being the group that holds government accountable for the policies. They now take dictation, and if you challenge the government, and it's a government they happen to like, namely a liberal government, they attack you. And that's what's happened here with the truckers. And I just want to close with this. The people who've been censored in COVID land by mainstream media and social media, many of the things that they said early on turned out to be correct. Joe Rogan talked about this a little bit today, but a lot of the ideas that people were super criticized for by the big wheels turned out to be true, including including natural immunity, which was poo-poo. The WHO even tried to change the definition of it on their website. Ridiculous, right? Many things that were censored turned out to be true, including ivermectin. And ivermectin saves lives. So I hope that all these censorious social media types are going to eat crow when it turns out at the end of the day and an accounting is made that the people who were being harmed mostly by the censorship of things that turned out to be true and that should have been known earlier, right? That's the way it always is. For science to be exposed and to move ahead, there has to be open debate. What should have happened, what I wish Spotify had done, I wish they had invited some of Joe Rogan's critics onto his show to debate some of the doctors they disagree with. Because you know what? They never engage on the merits of what they're saying. Never. They say it's misinformation, it's disinformation. They never say in what way or how or offer what their alternative theory on it is. They just say it's bad, it's he's lying, it's killing people. And everybody crumbles. It's the most inane thing I've ever seen, and I wouldn't actually even believe it could be happening if it weren't happening. It's so completely ridiculous. So these are bad things. I hope they don't affect Joe Rogan's programming on this, because he's one of the few truly powerful people who can mostly withstand the autocratic pushback on anybody who questions the official narrative. You know, the other thing, obviously the lab leak, we know that Tony Fauci, we've seen it in the emails, crafted a cover-up to protect himself. We also know that Tony Fauci and Francis Collins launched a smear campaign against the doctors from Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard who proposed the Great Barrington Declaration, which is focused protection, which is actually what we're going to be moving into now. They should have done it a year ago. Would have saved a lot of lives who were killed by lockdown policy. A lot of lives. But they wouldn't do it. And they didn't do it because the Great Barrington Declaration never got a fair shake. And you know why? Because the powers that be didn't want it to. And those are the powers that be that are yelling at Spotify, influencing all the people who are screaming censorship, 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 wanting censorship now, right? So don't ever forget those things. The people on the other side of this are not fair information brokers at all. They're just not. They've proven themselves to not be. And they've also proven themselves to be wrong on many things. So this is not a good day. What a tough battle to get through this. I was hoping that maybe the truckers would get a fair shake, even though I knew they wouldn't. That was pretty depressing. I was hoping that Spotify could really hold firm. They have, you know, with Joe Rogan, he's still there. And so that took courage. I'm sure that poor Mr. Eck that runs it was just under incredible pressure. Also by the stockholders too, if it's a publicly traded company. But now we're going to have to play this fictional game that Joe Rogan needs to balance what he says on the show. I don't agree with that at all. Not at all. But anyway. So that was the week. It's an incredible week, and there are going to be a lot more ups and downs as we move through this. But I know this may seem contradictory of my thoughts today, but I do believe that people are waking up. I think the truckers had a big influence on that. It allowed people to say what they really think. So that's always good, right? And Joe Rogan's still there, so that's good. And Spotify's still alive, so that's also good. And maybe Joni Mitchell and Neil Young will sit down with Joe Rogan at some point, or maybe Dr. Malone. That would be even better. and learn a little bit more about COVID-19 and the vaccines. Anyway, stay critical. See ya.